Inside America's Boardrooms, the informational show for board members and corporate secretaries. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, R.R. Donnelly, and the Society for Corporate Governance.
Welcome to this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, the CEO of Boardroom Resources, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the show. Today we're going to be looking at the Board Committee CEO search. And joining me to talk about that is Sara Hays, who's a board member with Apogee Enterprises. Sara, welcome.
Thank you, TK. Thanks for having me.
So I can't tell you how excited I was to be dealing with this topic. I've done probably 400 shows, and we have never dug down deep into the idea of the special CEO search committee. And now I have a person who actually was the chair of a board CEO search committee. So a good place for me to start is talk a little bit about how the committee gets formed, how you were elected as the chair for that, and then a little bit about how you took your committee and sort of planned the attack for finding a new CEO.
Sure, happy to do so and happy to address the topic because, as you know, one of the more important roles of a board is the hiring of a CEO and of course, thinking about leadership at the top. In our case, I had been on the Apogee board for a few years and actually was the youngest person on the board by quite a bit and learned about the company, which had at the time 6 different business units, but was looking for some leadership role to play and certainly talking to some of my colleagues about that. And in the course of being a board member, serving on committees, I had served on audit, as well as our finance and enterprise risk committee. I think what struck them was my certainly governance background. I do have a legal background in addition to a business background, had been a corporate secretary to boards and dealt with that aspect of it. But also, I'm a highly organized person. I understand project management, and at the end of the day, running a CEO search involves a lot of project management, both of internal and external parties. And so I think those were skills that certainly led the chairman, at the time it was a lead director actually on the board, to think that this would be a good next step for me. And I think in some ways the plan was that ultimately I would chair nominating and governance, which I ultimately did. And this again was an opportunity to sort of see those skills in action. The process we undertook was basically we had a CEO who was reaching retirement age, and we're in a cyclical business where you really need to outperform while things are good so you can manage through the troughs, because 90% of Apogee's goods and services are sold into commercial real estate construction markets. So, and it's a long cycle. Yeah. And so we were in a trough and knowing we needed to have a leader to help us come through and that we needed someone to come in at the right time. So we decided we really needed to talk to everybody, the management team, certainly the board members, but also every business unit head. So my committee, and I had 2 other board members with me on the committee, we basically interviewed in depth, came up with a script and interviewed all of those folks. We did probably 20 interviews, compiled all of that, and that led us then to coming up with, I guess the job description, but more importantly, a list of the priorities for the company so that we could look at the leader we wanted to bring in and make sure that this was a leader that we thought could accomplish that for the company.
Have those skill sets.
Exactly. And that process was great in that it involved everyone from the outset. The outgoing CEO had been there 15 years, so as CEO, he had been with the company much longer. And so it was important actually to have that kind of involvement and transparency with the business units, with management as we move forward too, so that the process would be credible.
So can I assume that there wasn't an inside candidate, or did you also have inside candidates that you were looking at?
Well, that was actually one of the more important decisions we needed to make. And I don't think this is uncommon in smaller companies. You don't necessarily have that bench strength across the board. And in our case, we determined that the type of strategic leadership we needed was not found in the company. So as part of this interview process, we did learn, to the extent there was interest, but we, as a committee and as a board, decided we needed to be very clear, and this work we did, which identified the characteristics, made it abundantly clear that person was not inside the company. So that allowed us, frankly, to move forward without leading someone along the way, which I think ended up being a very positive thing for management as well.
Yeah. So I'm curious about two things. One is, with all the interviews that you did internally before you even went externally, how long did the process take? And then was there anything in the process that really sort of narrowed candidates down to where you said, okay, we're focusing now on these couple or this group?
Sure. So we thought we went pretty quickly. Actually, it took about 6 to 7 months from start to finish. Keep in mind those first 6 weeks was this intensive internal interview process, and then we started doing some interviews with external search partners. Met with 4 of them to again narrow the field there. So that took us a couple months into the process. And then I think, again, that work we did on the front end really helped and was critical, because what happened, and I think what often happens when you get the search partner, is no matter how clear you think you've been, you're not going to find someone who meets everything you've put on that list. And what you also find is that the search firms have candidates that they are already working with that they want to float by you. And it frankly took probably the 3rd slate of candidates till we felt like we were communicating about specifically the type of candidates we wanted, and we were being seen, being shown those candidates. So that played out, but by the time we had our next board meeting, we actually had interviews, and there's nothing on paper that can replace the interview process, and we tried to seize the opportunity of having all of our directors in one place to really bring in folks that we felt met as many of the criteria as possible. And based on that, honestly, we all universally felt like there was one candidate that could exhibited the leadership we wanted, had evidence of business success in a larger business. We knew was sort of at the right point in their career to make a move, because again, as a small cap company that was trying to figure out how to come out of the downturn, you needed someone who really wanted that platform and to come in and lead. So the interview process, I think, was critical, and narrowing it down again, I think was aided but facilitated by the fact that we did this work on the front end, because there just were people at the outset that we were able to say this isn't where we're headed.
Right. Well, you were fortunate too that everybody was sort of on the same page. I imagine that could get a little dicey if it's not clean, if that candidate doesn't emerge so smoothly.
There's no question that we tried to present as much a unified front as a board, and my role as chair was to make sure there was buy-in in the process that we were leading, and so the communication part with other board members and frankly with senior management was critical throughout this process to make sure everyone felt like that was the case. I think that at the end of the day, the candidate who ultimately became our CEO wasn't someone the search firm knew. They actually had to kind of go from a clean slate looking back at our mandate, and in the end, that turned out to be, just who we were looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we always try and bring value to anybody that's watching these. So, the most important question might be, what lessons could you pass along from your experience to others that most likely in their career on the board would have to, go through the same experience at some point?
So, be clear on what your must-haves are versus what your nice-to-haves are. The fact that we did all that work on the front end, had something we could point to that had some non-negotiables in it, was important, because it's easy in the face of a person to sort of deviate a little bit from what you think you need. On the other hand, we don't know everything. You choose search partners for a reason, right? They add value. They're experienced with the process and with what's out there. So how do
But you have to interview them as well,
absolutely,
right?
which we did.
Yeah.
And chose our partner through a just as rigorous a process as we went through with the interviews with our business unit heads. So I think again, know your must-haves and then know what is negotiable and listen to the advisors that you've engaged who you're paying good money to add value to, because there are things we learned about the marketplace that, again, none of us being search professionals at the time could bring to bear. I would say choose your search partner wisely, to your point. I mean, we did a rigorous process, and the communication between you and the cultural fit is equally important. I mean, there were folks we've interviewed who, frankly, when they didn't win the dog and pony, were shocked because they just assumed that it was obvious that they were the right people. And, again, that fit between you and someone you're going to be working with pretty closely, certainly in my role as chair, was pretty critical, that it be someone I felt like I could work with. But you also have to understand the conflicts that a search firm brings, especially a firm that places a lot of CEOs. Once they place a CEO or a C-suite person, they're often prohibited from pulling people from that company. So what is the extent of the hands-off that company has? Because that could really limit the universe of folks that they're bringing to your attention. So choose wisely. I mentioned the communication piece. We tried to be as transparent as possible with everyone, including the CEO who would be leaving. First of all, you needed to show the appropriate respect to all of those parties. You want people to have buy-in in the process. You want them to understand where you are, because this has the potential to truly disrupt what's going on in the company. Yeah. It's going to be disruptive, but how do you minimize that? And in our case, it was through a lot of communication. So I was sending emails around constantly about here's where we are, here's what's happening next, with an appropriate level of detail. We certainly weren't sharing everything about who we were seeing, but within the company, the senior ranks certainly knew where things stood, and those board members that weren't necessarily on the search committee also had a very good sense of where things were. And then the last thing I'll mention is just, choose the right candidate. I mean, you need a leader. And there's a lot of voices out there today telling you what you can or can't do. As a small cap company, we were able to attract someone who actually had a long tenured career with another company, and we had to put a package together to attract that person. I can tell you in hindsight, Apogee has never performed better under this person's leadership, so we got it right. But we got dinged the first year afterwards in our say on pay vote. But that's okay, because we made the right decision, and we didn't unduly let external things like a say on pay vote dictate getting the right person. And then the rest came because we had the performance we needed to have as a company.
Well, Sara, you have to feel good that you made the right decision. Mm-hmm. And this was a very comprehensive look into something that I think, I agree with you, is critically important. It's one of the foundational responsibilities that the board has to get the right CEO in place. Mm-hmm. It makes their job easier, and it makes the company prosper mm-hmm. better. So I just want to thank you for taking the time. Again, this was a topic that made me excited, so I appreciate that you would come on and join us. And again, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Yeah. So that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take a look at another critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for Inside America's Boardrooms. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors, Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, R.R. Donnelly, and the Society for Corporate Governance.